Where do we find that? Yeah, in our task, we're looking for our understand and do. We'll do that in a minute. What else do we look for? I haven't written anything down. What else do we look for in our prompt? The audience. And what do we talk about the audience? To the third power, meaning that we go 3 deep. What do we not say about the audience? What audience can we not label? What do we not say about an audience? You can't be vague. So what would be examples of a vague audience? The citizens, Americans, everyone, the reader, right? Anything that's having to do with the press, this is a press conference, we would say the media wouldn't be an audience. Okay, so what, we can't be vague, so what do we have to do? How do we be specific? If we can't say Americans, what can we say?
People affected by workers.
That's still vague. That's still vague. Add an adjective. We are describing. We have to add a descriptor. So remember, we go back to George Bush. The mourning Americans. The angry Americans. The scared Americans. Is that ringing some bells a little bit? Okay. I'm going to try to organize my page a little bit better. So I'm going to put our audience up here in the corner. What else do we look for? Exigence. What is exigence? The reason why they did it at that time, right? What was that? To use like a horrible cliche, like what was the straw that broke the camel's back, right? What was that thing that made that happen? Okay. What else do we look for? Historical context. Anything that we know that's happening around the time. For who? The obstacles are leveraged for who?
Like the main, like, was the person who's giving the speech, or
for the speaker. Yep. So we would say like the speaker has like what leverages and what obstacles. We also kind of infer things about our speaker, right? Okay.
the author you talk about,
Like their background. Yep, the author, the speaker, the writer, whoever it is. Okay, good job, y'all. Okay, so let's read. On April 10th, 1962, as the United States was emerging from a recession, the nation's largest steel companies raised steel prices by 3.5%. President John F. Kennedy, who had repeatedly called for stable prices and wages as part of a program of national sacrifice during a period of economic distress, held a news conference on April 11, 1962, which he opened with the following commentary regarding the hike in steel prices. Read Kennedy's remarks carefully, then write an essay in which you analyze the rhetorical strategies President Kennedy uses to achieve his purpose. Support your analysis with specific references to the text. So one of the things that I want to recognize is this prompt is longer. There's a lot of like details on like what's happening at the time. The longer it is, the more details there are, the more important it is that you pay attention to it, because those details, if College Board puts those details in there, then they're saying that these are important details for you to understand in order to interpret the passage correctly, right? Okay, so we first look at April 10th, 1962 is our first date in there. That's what we're looking at. So on that date, like what are things that we know are happening around the early 1960s? Okay, so we have the Cold War. Would that impact the idea of like steel prices? Yeah. What else is happening around this time? Yep. What else? Good to know your history hasn't gotten any better since first quarter. What else? Yep. Okay, so we know all those things are happening. All right. Next, after this, is really important because they're telling us something that is impacting the message, right? The United States was emerging from a recession. So we know that prior to this, that we were in a recession. What are some things that we understand that happens during a recession? Like, how are people impacted? Like, what do we know about a recession?
Lots of good jobs.
Okay, so our unemployment rate goes up. What else? Yep. Things cost more, like prices increase. What else?
Poverty increases.
What do you mean?
Well, like because of the unemployment and inflation, like people lose money and.
So we have less money to spend. So who is the most impacted in a recession? So what class would we say?
Low class.
Yeah, I'd say the middle to low class is the most impacted. Okay, so we're looking at, like, that's important, right? Because the College Board, they don't assume that you understand that right before that was a recession, right? So they need to tell us that. The nation's largest steel companies raised steel prices by 3.5%. Like, that only helps them. It doesn't help the people, right? It only helps the large company. It does not help the people. How do we use steel? Do what? Okay. How else do we use steel? Any kind of infrastructure. Building material, auto industry, right? Military. All these things are impacted by steel. President John F. Kennedy, who is that going to be for us? It's going to be our speaker. We know he's a president. Him being assassinated doesn't do us any good in this, because obviously he gave this speech before he was assassinated. Okay? Anything else you know about JFK in general? No, he was not Republican, which means he was Democrat. Do you know how he was accepted? Like, how the people accepted him? Yeah, he was the youngest president ever elected. He's the first Catholic as well, but he was well liked by the people. Very charismatic. President John F. Kennedy, who had repeatedly called for stable prices and wages as part of a program of national sacrifice during a period of economic distress. So this is like what the president has asked. This is what he has asked of the country, right? He held a news conference on April 11th, 1962. So that is one day after the increase. Which he opened with the following commentary regarding the hike in steel prices. Do we think that that might have been his exigence? So this idea is his exigence. He had just called for national sacrifice from everybody. And then the steel companies raised their prices. That's his exigence. Like, we've got to speak now. Okay? Let's go to our audience. Who's in our audience? Who is the audience for this speech? Large steel companies. Nope, that's never an audience. Yeah. Struggling Americans. So we're going to think like the mid to low class, right? Who else?
It could be like all large companies because it's talking about the national sacrifice.
Yeah, I mean, it could be other large, and I would say even large or small companies. Why? Because if this steel company is going to raise their prices, what does that mean that the other, like, smaller steel companies would have to do? Increase their prices just to keep up. And if the steel companies are doing it, then other companies will do it. Right? Okay? Anybody else you could think? Let's see, what are you going to say? Okay, good. Yep. All right. Where's our task? Where does it start with? Analyze. So remember, we bracket our task. All right. We bracketed our task. What do y'all notice that's not there? What do we look for when we bracket our task? The understand or the do. What is not there? Either one, right? So there is no purpose. So this is our old prompt, right? Our old format. Now, between now and the exam, I'm going to give you some prompts that are going to give you difficulty. And I want to prepare you for all the things. We should always have a purpose. I want to give you what do we do when we don't, just in case. I don't know. It should never happen, but I don't want us to be caught off guard. So we always have to look for now when we get done, what does he want the audience to understand? And what does he want the audience to do? Those are the two things that we have to identify since it's not in there for us. All right. With your partner, now that we have deconstructed the prompt, sorry, my voice is just now coming back today. Now that we've deconstructed the prompt, what do we do next? Talk with your partner. Ready, set, go.
Oh, you put the shift? I've never done a shift right. So.
All right. After we deconstruct the prompt, now what do we do? Number the body paragraphs. Very good. See? Y'all remembering more than you know. So we go through, and as we're numbering, what are we looking for? And what? Very good, exciting. So when we're looking for shifts, what are things that we're looking for as we number? What would give us an idea that there's a shift? Change in paragraph, like sentence. We don't really see tone when we're just kind of numbering, but what do we see when we number? Transitional words, right, that would suggest a shift. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. And didn't y'all say like length, right, like body paragraph length, short to long, long to short? See, y'all remember more than you think. All right, so simultaneous 1, in this series 2, if this 3, it would 4, the facts 5, steel output 6, the cost 7, in short 8, the steel 9, the department 10, the department 11, price 12, some time ago 13. All right, where would you guess a shift? Talk with your partner between what and why. Ellie's really excited. All right, where would you guess a shift?
Between 4 and 5.
Why would you say between 4 and 5?
Because like the facts, it just sounds like
Okay, so you could mark it between 4 and 5. Where else could you mark it? Why? Because what? That goes to shorter ones. Okay. I also think between 7 and 8 there's something else.
It's like goes from informative to like more opinion like something.
Well, we haven't even read it yet.
maybe like he's just saying in short, this is what I mean.
That transition idea of like in short, right, means like I'm trying to bring it to an end. So for me, I would probably mark it between there. Now, if you want to mark it between 4 and 5, remember, this isn't like an end-all, be-all. Why do we do the squiggly mark? What does that help us understand? Or what does it help us do while we're reading?
Divide up our evidence for our claims.
Yep. But as we're reading, like, it will divide our claims later, but as we're reading, remember, it's a visual cue for us to be like, oh yeah, I have to look for a shift. Is there anything so far? Right? So, when we annotate now, what are we looking for? We are not annotating summary, right? We're not marking down summary. What are we annotating for? What are things we look for? Repetition. Repetition of ideas, of structure, of words, of like images. What else? Lists. We look for lists. What else? Do what?
Parallelism.
We can look for parallelism, which would be could also be a form of repetition.
Illusion.
I mean, kind of. Y'all miss allusions most of the time because y'all don't get what they're alluding to. What else?
Conjunction.
Conjunctions, good. Remember we put hearts around conjunctions? Remember we also look for semicolons, dashes. I heard comparisons. We do comparisons, but also contrasts. Good. See, I'll remember. We look for patterns. Any kind of pattern that we can find, that's what we're looking for. That's what we want to annotate for. Remember, when we're annotating, we want to make sure that those are the things that we're marking because that will save us time when we start to write, right? We're giving ourselves a little bit more time to read. We're giving ourselves 12 to 15 minutes to read and annotate, right? Which would leave us about 15 minutes to 10 to 12 minutes, sometimes maybe 15 to write a body paragraph, right? All right. Do you want me to annotate with you or can you do it on your own? Of course. All right, here we go. Simultaneous and identical actions of United States Steel and other leading steel corporations increasing steel prices by some $6 a ton constitute a wholly unjustifiable and irresponsible defiance of public interest. So here, this whole paragraph identifies like the enemy. Like this is the bad guy. United States Steel and other leading steel corporations. That's the bad guy. Wholly unjustifiable and irresponsible defiance. In this serious hour in our nation's history, when we are confronted with grave crisis in Berlin and Southeast Asia, when we are devoting our energies to economic recovery and stability. So first of all, what's happening in Berlin and Southeast Asia? Out of those two, which one are you sure of? Alyssa, what is it? Well, yeah, so we're out of World War II, right? Berlin Wall hasn't come down, right? But the wall is being built, right? During the wall being built during this time? Yeah, to separate. And then what's in Southeast Asia? Yep. Okay. Both of those things impacting us. When we are devoting our energies to economic recovery and stability, what do we hear? When we, repetition of the when we are asking reservists to leave their homes and families for months on end and servicemen to risk their lives, and 4 were killed in the last 2 days in Vietnam, and asking union members to hold down their wage requests at a time when restraint and sacrifice are being asked of every citizen. So these are all like the sacrifices all are making. Are being asked of every citizen. The American people will find it hard, as I do, to accept a situation in which a tiny handful of steel executives, so this is the few, whose pursuit of private power and profit, that is a direct contrast to everything above, right? Exceeds their sense of public responsibility can show such utter contempt for the interest of 185 million Americans. So the few are the big steel companies that are making the money. So it is really like a them versus us.
Would you say like there would be parallelism there, or like I kind of forgot how what parallelism like work whenever it comes to like.
Parallel would be like in structure, right? So it, like parallel ideas would be in structure. So I could do parallel ideas of like recovering stability, home and families, contrasting the power and profit, right? So the structure would be parallel, right? Yep. If this rise in the cost of steel is imitated by the rest of the industry, instead of rescinded, what does rescinded mean in this circumstance? It what? Yeah. So if the other steel companies do the same and they don't deny what they're doing, right? Like deny what the big companies are doing and don't do it, it would increase the cost of homes, autos, appliances, and most other items for every American family. It would, there we go, so now we have an it would increase the cost of machinery and tools for every businessman and farmer. So now we have the family, and then who's going to be impacted? The businessman, the farmer. It would seriously handicap our efforts to prevent an inflationary spiral from eating up the pensions of our older citizens. Now we're impacting the elderly and our new gains in purchasing power. So this is, if this is the cause here, this is going to be the effect of what happens. This is the impact of their decisions. And notice we're going from like who's impacted. It would add Secretary McNamara. Notice that it's the footnote, right? This isn't a bright footnote that we need to like really analyze, but it tells you that the McNamara is the Secretary of Defense. Right? Sometimes remember the footnote helps us to analyze like allusions if they're in there. It would add Secretary McNamara informed me this morning an estimated $1 billion to the cost of our defenses. So now it's gone from impacting these people to now it's impacting our military at a time when every dollar is needed for national security and other purposes. Why? Because we're in the middle of a war. It would make it more difficult for American goods to compete in foreign markets, more difficult to withstand competition from foreign imports. So now it's going to impact our foreign economy. More difficult to withstand competition from foreign imports, and thus more difficult to improve our balance of payment positions and stem the flow of gold. And it is necessary to stem it for our national security. So now our national security is impacted. Necessary to stem it for our national security if we are going to pay for our security commitments abroad. Like if we can't afford this war, then what's going to happen to us? We're going to lose that war. I mean, we end up anyways, but we're going to lose that war. We're going to lose people, right? And it would surely handicap our efforts to induce other industries and unions to adopt responsible prices and wage policies. So then this is going to be, it's going to create a domino impact. So if they don't change their prices, then other industries, in order to keep up, are going to have to increase just like they did. The facts of the matter are there is no justification for an increase in the steel prices. The recent settlement between the industry and the union, which does not even take place, was widely acknowledged to be non-inflationary, and the whole purpose and effect of this administration's role, which both parties understood, was to achieve an agreement which would make unnecessary any increases in price. So what can you infer has happened prior to this with the industry and the union? What does that paragraph state has already happened prior to this increase?
Already having like made an agreement, like we had come together to compromise.
Yeah. So, basically, the relationship between a union and an industry. If the union wants, like they're saying we don't have fair wages, they strike. What does the industry have to do? They have to increase their wages, or they have to come to an agreement. When an industry increases the wages of their workers, what must the industry do with their product? Raise prices, right? Because I have to balance that out. So there was already like a possible strike that was going to happen. So where the steel company would say, we have to raise our prices even during a recession because X, Y, and Z. JFK is going in and saying, here is why here's why X, Y, and Z aren't occurring, right? So our workers are demanding more money. Well, we've already fixed that. The government actually had to intervene to help y'all come to an agreement, right? To make sure that the workers continued to work and got paid fair wage while the industry did not increase. We've already agreed to that. So that's not a reason for this increase. Steel output per man is rising so fast that labor costs per ton of steel can actually be expected to decline in the next 12 months. Let's talk about economics again. Steel output per man. What does that mean?
The amount of steel that's produced by one person.
Yep. So that little man is in there producing the steel. Okay? How much can they output in a day? It is rising so fast, so these people are producing more steel, that labor costs per ton of steel can actually decline. If they are producing so much and they have a surplus of steel, what should happen to the price of steel? It should go down because we have a lot, so we've got to get rid of it. When there is not a lot, then we have to increase the price. So the steel output per man is rising so fast that labor costs per ton of steel can actually be expected to decline. It costs us less to produce it right now. We're still paying them a good price, but because we're producing so much, we don't have to charge it, right? And in fact, the acting commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics informed me this morning that, and I quote, employment costs per unit of steel output in 1961 and 1958. So that's during the recession. So the amount that it cost us to pay our employees, even during the recession, stayed the exact same. Right? So during the recession, we didn't even have to increase how much we had to pay our employees because we were paying them enough. So it's staying the same even coming out of a recession. So if you don't know anything about economics, you can at least see that the cost per ton is declining. The cost to pay our employees is like leveling off. The cost of major raw materials. So how much it costs to get the materials to make the steel. Scrap and coal has also been declining. So material costs have been declining. And for an industry which has been generally operating at less than 2/3 of its capacity, its profit rate has been normal and is expected to rise sharply. Profit is going to rise. So what it's costing us to get the material for the steel is decreasing. And they are doing this all at 2/3 capacity, and they're still making money even coming out of a recession. If they can go to full capacity, they would be making even more money, right? So their profit's going to increase. Its profit has been normal and can be expected to rise sharply this year in view of the reduction of idle capacity. Their lot has been easier than that of 100,000 steelworkers thrown out of work in the last 3 years. Their lot, meaning their life, right? Their journey. Their meaning the large companies. So these large companies are still making money. While the steel workers lost their jobs. So again, it is the them versus us. The industry's cash dividends have exceeded $600 million in each of the last 5 years, and earnings in the first quarter of this year were estimated in the February 28th Wall Street Journal to be among the highest in history. So these steel companies are making more money now than ever. Here are all the reasons why they would say we need to increase the price, because we're not making money, it's costing more to make it, the materials cost more, all these things. So he has just proven all the reasons. So these are all reasons that the steel company would give for the increase. They're all faulty. In short, at a time when they could be exploring how more efficiency and better prices could be obtained, reducing prices in the industry in this industry in recognition of lower costs, their unusually good labor contract, their foreign competition, and their increase in production and profits, which are coming this year, a few gigantic corporations have decided to increase prices in ruthless disregard of their public responsibility. So again, this is the few versus the many. So these are all the things, these are all things the company can be doing to get better and to help. So what is this showing about the steel companies? Yep. So this shows corporate greed. The Steel Workers Union can be proud that it abided by its responsibilities in this agreement, and this government also has responsibilities which we intend to meet. So here, the Steel Workers Union are not the bad guy. Many times when prices go up, it's because the union is asking for more money. So people are looking for somebody to blame, so they usually blame the unions, right? But also the government says we have our responsibilities that we intend to meet. The government is responsible for who? The people, right? So this is basically a promise. We are going to look out for our people. These companies aren't looking out for you, but we promise we will. The Department of Justice and the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, are examining the significance of this action in a free and competitive economy. It's kind of like a veiled threat. When the Department of Justice and the FTC start looking into your company, that's not a good thing. So they're saying, why are you making these decisions? Because it's not for the good of the company or for profit, right? Because you're already making a profit. The Department of Defense and other agencies are reviewing its impact on their policies of procurement. Procurement means how do we purchase? Where do we purchase? So the government has contracts with steel companies or with these large companies, right? So now the Department of Defense is well, we need to look into these contracts, because if y'all have shady business dealings, then we're going to change our contract. We're going to end our contract with you and go find steel somewhere else. So now if you think it's going to impact your profit, it definitely will when the U.S. government says we won't buy steel from you anymore. And I am informed that steps are underway by those members of Congress who plan appropriate inquiries into how these decisions are so quickly made and reached. What does that show about the steel companies? How quickly they're making these decisions. That what? Yeah, that they're careless. And what legislative safeguards may be needed to protect the public interest? Okay, that's a veiled thread as well. As well. Do we need to get laws and legislation in order to make sure that you don't do this again? Price and wage decisions in this country, except for very limited restrictions in the case of monopolies and national emergency strikes, are and ought to be freely and privately made. That is a concession. He argues that absolutely, as a company and in a free trade environment, you should have the ability to pay your employees what you think they should get, and you have the ability to say whatever you want to charge for your product. Until there is a monopoly or a national emergency strike, do we step in? But the American people have a right to expect in return for that freedom a higher sense of business responsibility for the welfare of their country than has been shown in the last 2 days. So again, this is like the them making money or making decisions for themselves. If we're going to let you decide things on your own, then you have to make those decisions that will ultimately help us. Some time ago, I asked each American to consider what he would do for his country. What is that a reference to? His what? A speech? What quote?
Didn't he say like, oh, I don't even want this, like,
Alyssa?
what ask not what you do, what the country can do for you, what you can do.
Yep. Some time ago, I asked each American to consider what he would do for his country. And I asked the steel companies as well. In the last 24 hours, we had their answer. What is their answer? What are they willing to do for their country? Nothing. Tomorrow, we will talk about planning and claims and thesis statements. Okay. And we will write.
For the AP classroom,
Yeah.
I can't really write to annotations, so we're going to